Okay, we are live.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome. I would like to call to order the October 4th session of the Norwalk Board of Estimate and Taxation. Ms. King, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Rilling,
Here.
Mr. Abrams,
Here.
Ms. Brown, Mr. Camacho, Mr. Frere,
Here.
Mr. Jelleret,
Here.
Mr. Kasimis. 4 present, you have a quorum.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of September 13th, 2021 regular meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Abrams. Are there any corrections, deletions, omissions?
Mr. Mayor, this is Troy. I was in attendance at that meeting, so I noticed that it wasn't there on page 1.
Okay,
And I was not in attendance.
Okay, so then we have to move the minutes will reflect that Mr. Jelleret was present and Mr. Frere was not.
Correct.
Okay, so if we could make those corrections. The two of you look so much alike, I can imagine, you know, you got you mixed up.
Twins.
Yeah.
Who are you trying to impress?
Any other corrections, deletions, or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes as corrected?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions?
One abstention.
Mr. Frere abstains, Mr. Jelleret, Mr. Abrams, and Mayor Rilling approve. Next item on the agenda, special appropriations agenda. There are none. Next item, item number 3, transfer agenda, section B, page 7. Mr. Dakowitz, are you going to handle this? You're on mute.
You're muted.
I will do my best, and hopefully if we need any other information, Chitsame might be able to assist me.
Oh, okay. Chitsame is here as well. Okay.
Correct.
Chitsame, Chitsame, did you want to handle this? Ms. Lamb?
I'm sorry, I just logged on. What item are we on?
The transfer agenda, item number 3 on page 7.
Okay. Basically, these are the different transfer. I'm sorry, can you hold on one second? I just have to pull up my agenda item.
Sure. Yep.
While she does that, Mr. Mayor, do we need to move the item?
Yes. Would you like to move that?
So moved.
Okay, it's moved by Mr. Abrams. Thank you.
I tried to buy you a little time, Chitsame.
Little help from my friends. I'm glad to start. We're just moving items in the building management department. We're talking section B here, correct?
Yep.
Finance department, right?
Yeah, finance is first.
Finance is first.
If you want, I could talk about mine because I'm in part of finance.
Okay, whoever wants to talk.
No, that's fine. I can handle this. So we are
Okay.
looking to move 118,000 from contingency to business expense. And this is covering the Board of Education's $118,000 portion of the Evergreen Solutions Operations Review Efficiency Study.
Okay.
And the second item is $99,996. We're just transferring it from other professional services to business expenses. That is for part of the portion, for the city portion of the efficiency study, which totals $275,000. I'm pleased to report that I spoke to the people from Evergreen last Friday. They are eager, ready, and raring to go. The contract has been signed by both parties, but before there's a green light, Shitsame has to sign off to say that the funds are available in the proper account. So these two transfers would allow us to set aside the money so that Evergreen would be able to get paid for their efficiency study.
Okay, and in the interest of appropriateness, I guess we'll take them one at a time. So this is the Finance Department. Any comment, discussion, or questions from any members of the BET?
Just a question, and if it happened in a meeting prior that I was in attendance at, I apologize. But is there a reason that we're having the city side out of contingency fund the Board of Ed portion of the survey?
Well,
I can probably answer that.
Okay, Mayor, thank you.
Yeah, back when Dr. Adamowski was here as superintendent, we were looking at ways that we can perhaps share resources. And I recommended that we have an efficiency study. Dr. Adamowski agreed, and I agreed that the city would pay for the efficiency study.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimous. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Next.
Mr.
can I have a
Mayor?
Motion, yes?
Who moved the item?
Mr. Abrams.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to move forward the tax assessor department transfer?
So
moved,
moved.
Troy.
Mr. Jelleret, was that you?
Yes.
Mr. Jelleret moves. So we're having from the tax assessor department, Mr. Dakowitz or Mr. Ford, who will be handling this?
I believe Mr. Ford will respond.
I am here. As many of you are aware, the assessor's office has been without a deputy assessor for quite some time since the retirement of Bill O'Brien. We have put out the ads for the position. We've not had satisfactory individuals applying to the position as to date. So what we've been doing is we've been consulting with the individuals that performed the revaluation with us. And what we're looking to do is to continue that process. And these funds are to ensure that we have the funds to do that.
Thank you. Questions from the BET?
Just one question, Mr. Troy. It says part-time. How many, what's how many hours, or what's this guy's, the person's schedule for this 60,000? Is this a half a year, a quarter of a year, or what?
So what we're doing is we're actually transferring roughly half of the position, the vacant position's salary from a salary line over so that we can pay the consultants. It's on an hourly rate. Depends on the number of permits. It depends on a lot of different things. We're not expecting to spend the full 60,000 on this particular project at all.
Thank you.
I had a quick question.
Mr. Fryer?
Is this, is there any reason why you can't fill it? How long have you gone now looking for this replacement?
I believe it's been almost 2 years.
Yeah,
I joined in April of 2019. And in June and July, the assessor and the deputy assessor, the assessor retired and the deputy assessor resigned to go to another city. In January, February of 2020, Bill Ford got hired around 1 month before COVID, and he's been working without a deputy since.
yeah, that's what I thought. This has been quite a while. Is there any reason why we can't find somebody? Is it?
Well, there's a couple of reasons I'll say. One is COVID. For a large, basically the entire time we've been advertising, it's been during COVID. The additional issue is the field of assessing. We're not really generating a lot of new younger assessors. It's not something that you go to college for. It's not something that you desire to be. Many people do it as a second career. They did other things, and after that, they get into this field either from appraising, from different areas, financial fields. Excuse me. So that's how you get into the field. And so there's not a lot of people in the field.
I would also add there, I've been informed since we had the time where we were down the two heads of the department, there's a real supply-demand imbalance in the state of Connecticut. Mr. Ford's most recent position was in Massachusetts. So we spread the net wide and then they have to qualify. At any one time, there are usually 2 or 3 spots available to be filled in the state of Connecticut and very few qualified candidates.
Is it a factor of money that we can't pay people enough? I would assume in Norwalk that it's a high pressure job, there's a lot to be done. Is it that we're not offering enough money, or?
I would say, and I'll let Bill answer as well, it's not a question of money. We made an offer to a very qualified person who Mr. Ford had worked with in Massachusetts. And at the last moment, they declined because they didn't want to relocate. So I think it's non-financial factors.
And it would have been a considerable increase in salary for that individual. So it's not about the money, it's more location. And as we said, there are not a number of qualified candidates available.
So if this continues to go on, I mean, are we going to have to just stick with outside consultants to fill in to backfill where you need it? Or is there any way to train anybody in-house?
We are expanding the training of in-house employees. It would be quite some time before they're available to be promoted to that position. We are continuing to look. I'm continuing to get in touch with people in other states and other areas to see if we could get a qualified individual to come.
Are we falling behind anywhere because of this vacancy, or are we able to keep up with the consultant?
We have been able to keep up with the consultant. They also assist us on other commercial matters, so we've been moving ahead.
Okay.
I would also venture to say, there's a 5-year cycle with assessment. So right after the reassessment, we have hundreds of properties filed with the Assessment Review Board. And then we have them filed with the courts. And there was a tremendous backlog, and Mr. Ford did an exceptional job coordinating with the corporate counsel's office, whittling them down. I think more than half are already gone. So we're coming into the last 2 years of that cycle where we have fewer, maybe smaller dollar amount items that we're handling. And we are hopeful that with the next reassessment, that we would have fewer properties subject to appeal. But that will also help us in the coming year or two.
So my final question would be, is it possible just to outsource this function? I mean, not to get rid of you, Bill, but I mean,
I personally think that the people we've hired on an outsourced basis part-time are technically expert, but there's nothing like having someone full-time in person, guiding the staff, training them, and handling some of the other administrative details. There's been a tremendous burden on Mr. Ford, and we'd like to allay that.
And the intention is if we could get somebody that is qualified to be the deputy, there's a potential that they'd be able to take over in the future. So you have some continuation.
okay.
Any further questions or discussion? So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Next, let me scroll through my page here.
Planning and zoning?
Next is Planning and Zoning Department. Who will move that item?
So moved.
Mr. Freyer moves. And who's going to handle this, Mr. Dakowitz?
Steve Kleppen is with us, head of planning and zoning.
Mr. Kleppen?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for giving me a few minutes. In summary, we have fallen behind on paperwork in-house, just basically because it's the permit volume that we're seeing, and this kind of happened at the very kind of beginning of COVID, has just gotten voluminously large. And so what we've tried to do as many things as possible in-house to clean up procedure and process to expedite things, but it's just something is always at the expense of something else. So we'd like to try to bring in another part-time administrative assistant to help with some basic tasks such as filing, getting permits processed and into the computer system, and making sure small things are done so that we don't fall behind in those areas. So that's where the funds will go.
Any questions for Mr. Kleppen? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We scroll back. So the next item on the agenda is other business. There are 2 items under other business. We should handle them separately as well. One is FY 2021 ballot surplus rollover request. Do I have a motion to move that forward for discussion?
So moved.
Mr. Frayer. Mr. Dakowitz, I believe this is yours.
Thank you. Balance rollovers. What we're looking at here, again, I use the term improperly, but it helps me explain something. I use the term behavioral economics. And what I mean is we have a budget process we go through for 8 or 9 months. We battle, we settle and agree on numbers. And then when the managers exceed their revenues or spend less than their planned expenditures, I like to reward them or give them an incentive. I don't want to have a situation where they feel they have to spend it or lose it. And we get into $500 hammers and $5,000 toilet seats. So part of the concept behind the rollovers is a reward for managers who manage to beat their budgets. Primarily, it is for items that were budgeted this past year, but usually extenuating circumstances that it didn't get spent last year. Most notably this past year, because of COVID, supply chains were stretched. Vendors couldn't perform. The materials weren't ready. So if a department had a surplus and then asked to roll over that aspect of the budget that they were not able to spend so that they don't have to eat into the current fiscal year 22 budget, we tend to look favorably upon it. What we try to avoid is what I call a backdoor budget increase, where if you got turned down for a budget item, now you're just trying to use last year's budget to increase it. So that's the concept behind the rollovers. We do it by departments and individual line items. The first is for the tax collector, $40,100. Lisa, if you'd like to address what this rollover is for.
Yes, thank you, Henry. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
This is expense money that we had budgeted to allow us to conduct title searches and place legal notices for what was intended to be our 2020 tax sale. And the state of Connecticut, the Governor Lamont put a moratorium on tax sales during COVID. So we were not able to have the tax sale during that fiscal year. We rescheduled it to 2021, and then we had to move it ahead a few months further because we just got behind with our work. So the sale originally scheduled for July 2020 is being held in 2 weeks. It's being held on October 18th of 2021. Now, in the meantime, we've had to, under state law, there's a process that we have to file in order to conduct a tax sale. It's a seizure of property, extrajudicial, meaning we do not go through the court system. So we have to file certain paperwork. We have to publish legal notices in order to attempt to reach taxpayers and others who are involved with these properties because they stand to lose their property or their interest in the property. These legal notices are basically full page notices in their Norwalk hour. They're costly. and the title searches that we have to perform in order to identify who the lien holders are that we have to notify. This is all basic money that we have to spend in order to have the sale. Now, we get all this money back when we conduct the sale or when properties, as you know, pay off their back taxes and fees prior to the sale in order to avoid the sale completely. So these costs are not borne by any Norwalk taxpayers. They're not borne by the on-time taxpayers. They're ultimately borne by those property owners who are involved in the sale, or they're paid for at the sale itself if we have to go to sale. But in the meantime, we've had to spend this money. I've had to place those notices and so forth. So we had the money budgeted, we couldn't spend it, but we're spending it now. And it would be helpful to us, to my division, if the board could see fit to approve that transfer so we can properly pay these bills.
Thank you, Ms. Biagirelli. Any questions?
So are we gonna, so our revenue is gonna go up, if that's gonna carry forward into 2021 or 22?
Your revenue is going up now because we've been collecting on these properties basically since November of 2019, when we first started working on the sale. So the revenue has been coming in all along. And this is our biggest sale ever. We've collected $7.5 million on these properties since November of 2019. So if you look at our monthly reports, you'll notice that our collection rate at the end of last year was higher than normal. Part of that is possibly attributable to COVID, but also part of it is because we were working on the sale. And whenever we're working on a tax sale, our revenue does spike. The number of transactions spikes and the revenue also spikes. In tax sale years, it goes up. In non-tax sale years, it goes down. So yes.
It's money well spent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to make a point that most, if not all, other communities outsource their tax sales. And we are fortunate enough to have someone who really is an expert at it and puts a lot of time and energy into it. And she does it in-house. The outsourced communities, they pay a hefty fee out of the collection. And so Lisa's been doing this for quite some time now and saved the city millions and millions of dollars. So I want to really make note of that. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mayor Rilling.
Any further discussion or questions for Ms. Biagirelli? Okay, Mr. Dakowitz.
Next would be the information technology area. There's a request for $54,205, primarily relates to cybersecurity. I'll let Joyce Liu, the head of IT, respond.
Oh, hi, good morning, good evening, everyone. So we are moving forward $54,000. Actually, around $45,000 is from the hardware. During the COVID, hard time to place the order for our hardware, and you could place a hardware in July, and we haven't got our shipment. So most of the money is on the hardware. So the laptop, the price is getting more expensive, and we are moving from desktop to the laptop in order to compensate that the future we might be working from home to cover the scenario. So, and cybersecurity, we are also moving toward a multi-factor authentication, so that we need all this money to cover for more license for the next year. So, did you guys have any question regarding to the two items?
Any questions for Ms. Liu?
No questions for how you want to use the expense, but just looking at the documentation, the support, I just don't understand the comment to cover language line over the phone interpretation. It shows up a few times on here. Henry, can you just clarify what that means for me? I understand her Joyce's comments very clearly. I just don't understand that comment. I'm sorry for my ignorance.
No, that's fine. I think that comment got copied erroneously to IT. it really belongs in community service, human relations with Lamont Daniels will be addressing shortly. So I think that was just erroneous.
Okay,
That
Thank
it's in IT. Yeah, sorry.
thank you very much.
And the laptops, you should be aware, with COVID, we've had to buy a tremendous number of laptops. And with the scheduling, supply chains, and increased pricing, we didn't want to impact this year's budget for those expenditures that should have been from last year.
Okay, any further questions for Ms. Lou? All right, Mr. Dakowitz?
Thank you. The next is community service, human relations, and fair rent. Lamont, I'll do it by category. So human relations and fair rent was 14,800. Youth services was 195, and then you have health for 20. So as long as you address all three.
Great. And I'm also joined by our health director, Deanna Diamore, so she can also respond to any specific questions if you may have. Good evening. So thank you again for this time. Thank you for your time. So to Henry's point, the Human Relations and Fair Rent Department continues to see an increase and in terms of residents receiving services, specifically to fair rent inquiries and fair rent complaints. The $10,000 you see is to continue the consultant that we have. We do have a legal consultant who specializes in fair rent. Our previous director has left, and it's also been a challenge to replace her specifically with the fair rent skills. And so through support from our corporate legal, we were able to get a part-time temporary lawyer who specializes and is used quite often. So we're asking to continue this service while we promote. We actually did a recruitment about a couple of months ago, had a hiree, but then this person withdrew. I will say it definitely wasn't because of the salary, because we are the highest. We did our own research. I think at this point, it's just really finding the right skill set. But we're also looking at the best way to keep this service, and we're talking internally with HR to identify what is the best way. But at present, we most certainly need this service and individual based on the mission of the Human Relations and our obligation of Norwalk. I can answer any questions, or I can go straight to the language line piece if you like.
Why don't you go right to that?
Sure. So to cover the language line, so the city, again, as the community service department, we are certainly fulfilling our mission, serving all residents, and we do not want language to be a barrier. So the language line is a service that the city facilitates where when we don't have any person on staff to speak any language, we're able to request the language line service and be able to have a real-time conversation with anyone in Norwalk that may speak a language other than what we can. And so we have, again, seen an increase in our language line. We're also promoting it, encouraging residents, don't let language be a barrier. So we're asking to continue to cover and move additional funding, because we have seen an increase. Just in the past 3 months, we're up to $8,000. But I see this as a good thing. That means Norwalkers are coming, they're being served, and we're able to speak to them in their own language. So I definitely see that as a very positive as we continue to promote the services, and also promoting that we have translation services to meet the dominant language that Norwalkers spend. Would you like me to go on?
Please.
So it says community service youth services. That's not accurate, like the record to reflect. It should just be community services. If you recall, the BET approved $150,000 to support the city's Equity and Justice for All initiative. This is an annual contract. We just completed phase 1. So we're looking forward to continue this work. The city put forth through the BET 2/3, and 1/3 of that, which is $50,000, came from the Fairfield County Community Foundation. So this is the balance. We need to continue to pay our consultant as we move forward in phase 2. And then lastly, the Mayor Summer Youth Employment. Last year, the Mayor Summer Youth Employment also relies on donations, and with COVID, we were hit very hard. And so we're asking to move the $95,000 that through the outside grants that we get every year, so that we continue to serve our Mayor's Youth Summer Employment. On average, we serve about, or provide jobs and training and support about 150 young people. So this is a request to continue this program that's been in existence for a long time. In 95, and this will supplement the fundraising, and we do anticipate to do the donations from organizations across the city this year around, but we were hit also very hard with COVID. And we also keep a few of our older high school students with paid internships, and they work throughout the city department, and we want to promote and continue to help our young people develop the skills so they could be good citizens and have some good work skills in youth services. Deanna, or if you want like any questions before we move to health department?
Yes, we have Ms. Diamore here. Does anybody have any questions, or Ms. Diamore, do you have any other comments?
Oh, sure, Mayor, just to briefly describe the request for the health department, 2 items. One is we're ready to finally replace our rain gauge. We've had competing priorities, as you know, over the past year, but we're ready to go to, it's needed to replace with IT's help. We're ready to replace it. And then the second item is related to furniture expenses. You may recall the BET approved funding to support additional furniture within the health department because of delays with, getting the furniture and getting it installed. We need to just move it and pay it out of this fiscal year.
Thank you. Any questions from either Mr. Daniels or Ms. Diamore?
I had one question, Lamont, on the 95,000 on the mayor's summer youth employment program. Are we targeting this for next summer?
No, we have an outstanding balance.
We have an outstanding balance of 95,000?
Yes, and we didn't we don't have a lot of fundraising, so we have a balance that we're looking to support for this past year.
Just to make it clear, the youth did get paid.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, of course, yes.
So where did the money come from?
Well, community services ran a surplus. So the point is, when I look at the whole department, they ran a surplus, and maybe on that line item, they might have had a deficit, and that's where they
Correct.
rolled over.
Correct. Thank you.
So, but we were able to fund the mayor's program. So for next year, without COVID, would you believe that we'd be able to recoup or get back to the same levels of contributions from outsiders?
Absolutely, and that is the goal. I think this year, moving forward, we would have to, if we don't get both with the city's participation and fundraising, to be very honest, we may just have to decrease our numbers of young people for jobs, but my goal is not to do that.
But so do we need the whole 95 then? I mean, do we need that 95 now, that if you think that your contributions are going to get back to normal levels pre-COVID?
We need the 95 now because we were anticipating the budget to hire, I think around 120. So we anticipated the fundraising to meet that goal. Unfortunately, we did not.
But you were able to pay the people during this past summer out of other non-used expenses, non-used budget, right?
Correct.
So you were able to take care of it. Now next year, when that rolls around next summer, or next fall, or next spring, that's when you're going to go into your fundraising, I suspect. Won't you be able to get back to that same level? You'll have another surplus next year, perhaps. I don't see why you need the 95 now, or maybe it's only a fraction of that you really need, since you were able to cover those expenses from someplace else.
Right. From I was able to cover it, but we also from an entire department perspective, you're right, was able to cover it, but we didn't do other things because this was a priority. I would prefer not to cut things from other departments in order to pay the youth for moving forward. Does that make sense?
So are you, no, so are you saying that you are looking to have some shortfalls going forward because you used this 95,000 for the summer program?
No, this 95 will make us whole
No.
and then,
So
pardon?
for the rest of the year, you're going to be okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So why are we rolling forward another 95,000? Why can't we use that someplace else?
Because I have a negative balance.
But you covered that negative balance from other accounts.
I don't know if I'm explaining it right. I mean, we paid it, but I still need to put that money back, I guess, if that makes sense.
The department as a whole is not over budget. You don't have a deficit right now. You don't need any more money right now. And you think that you're going to be able to get through the rest of the year the way you're going right now, right?
No, sir, we do have a deficit. I looked at it today. It's actually, it's like 121,000.
Henry, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but if you were able to pay those people, use that 95,000, whatever that deficit was, to fund the summer program because of the contributions being down, where did that money come from? Is that, are you going to be short for the rest of the year in the whole department?
No, I don't anticipate that, no.
Okay, then you don't need the 95 though. If you're fine right now, in the rest of the year, you're going to be okay. You don't need the 95.
No, I'm not fine because we were in a deficit.
What is it? You're
121.
I don't mean to be.
No, I don't know if I'm
guy.
explaining it right. From looking at our budget, we are $121,000 negative. So I like to move this 95.
So you're running $120,000 negative right now. And
Correct.
Through the end of the year, if you don't get this 95, then you're going to have to come back and ask us for more money before the end of the year, which we're going to have to take out of contingency or something like that.
No, this is just a summer program. So this is June, July, and August.
I got it.
So this is not a year-round program, if I understand your question.
I know it's not but you paid for the summer program out of other funds because you didn't have the funds to pay for the summer program during the summer, correct?
Well, I would like to say the city covered those expenses for us.
Mr. Dakowitz, maybe we can try to clarify, because some of these funds were used in July and August of this current fiscal year.
Chitsime is closer to the accounting. I think that the reality is that Lamont's whole area generated a significant surplus. Okay, this is one topic where we were looking to fund $95,000. So we have these funds to supplement the current year's budget so that we could have the level that we need for this coming year. Okay, we paid for this summer, but again, the timing of those expenditures might have been coming out of this year's budget. Okay, if they worked June, July, August, and they got paid, but they got paid out of fiscal year 22, then there's a deficit there. And we've already paid last year's expenses with this year's budget. That's happened in several departments. So this rollover supplements and goes back to replenish this year's budget that was established for this coming summer's program. I think that's
what I'm asking. So without this 95,000, they're going to be short someplace else.
Right, because, and this is accounting bookkeeping. It's not Lamont's expertise. He hired the people, he paid them, okay? And the timing of the payment might have depleted the fiscal year 22 budget. So we wanted them to get paid. We took it out of the current budget, and this will make whole the fiscal year 22 budget so that he has sufficient funds for this coming summer. And because he ran a surplus, it was just, we wanted to get them paid and we couldn't go backwards because the bills came in late or something like that.
Right. So if
I'm sorry if I confused you.
But Lamont, without the $95,000, you could run into some problems in some other accounts for the remainder of the fiscal year. That's
The reason why,
what Henry's saying.
Just say yes, Lamont, just say yes.
yes. Okay.
Thank you.
That's
Okay.
a nice short answer. Just say that.
I can say yes. I can say yes.
There you go.
I'm sorry if I confused you.
I'm not gonna ask you to explain your answer. Just say yes.
Yes.
Any further comments or questions for Mr. Daniels, Mr.
Thank you
Dakowitz,
very
Mr.
much.
I wouldn't dare ask him another question.
It sounds good in my head.
Okay, so moving forward, Mr. Dakowitz?
Yes, the next department is the police department, and they have a number of requests that add up to $116,000. Mickey Dosimo is here to address them. Mickey, you're muted.
Mr. Dosimo?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mayor, Henry, board members. Thank you for taking the time to consider this request. So when we first came on, Henry explained the spirit of the rollovers just right. During the COVID period, a lot of law enforcement agencies or purchasers of these type of equipment slowed down or even came to a screeching halt. When we came back online, the end of last fiscal year, there were a lot of shortages, production delays, and so on. So these funds were intended to be used last year. For the extenuating circumstances, they really couldn't be. If they're approved tonight, I'll get working with our division commanders to get them spent right away so we can get the necessary equipment. Henry and I discussed this list at length, as we usually do. There were one or two items that we decided not to put forth, but we did feel that this list was appropriate to be rolled over and spent in the first half of this fiscal year.
Mickey, do you have the details? I can read them off and you can explain them.
Absolutely. I do have the details in front of me. If you want to read them, I'd be happy to explain them or take any questions.
$11,590 for defibrillator.
Yep, that's exactly. It is for defibrillators. We have to keep upgrading the equipment. You know, defibrillators, believe it or not, have expiration dates. And as we replace the old ones, we have our equipment up to date. Once again, we were supposed to buy these in the spring and the manufacturers ran short. So here we are.
$30,000. It says due to COVID, there was a delay in finding an appropriate contractor. Was this the Marine?
The $30,000 is to do a study to replace the Marine unit. As the mayor knows, and probably most of you, the building is failing. We'd like to get that relocated as soon as possible. So if we did not get this $30,000, that would have to be put on the back burner.
$58,857 for tactical vests.
Tactical vests is another item that, believe it or not, there's a 5-year replacement plan. They have sort of an expiration date. And in keeping up with those expiration dates, this was planned for, again, last year. We discussed it with this board, and now we want to make sure we keep everything up to date. It is safety equipment and necessary to replace them with the plan.
And the last was $15,842 special munitions, tear gas, etc.
Yeah, these are our less lethal munitions that, again, ran in short supply when people came back online and started to buy law enforcement equipment. Our manufacturers ran short. We do believe that they are in ample supply now that we can get them. This list, don't forget, had to be put in near the beginning of this fiscal year. So we've been sort of waiting a little bit till the approval came through this board. And again, if it is approved, we'll start to make these purchases immediately.
That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Dosimo. Any questions or comments for Mr. Dosimo?
Where do we stand on the acquisition of the additional vests that we need? That was several months ago that we had approved that, I thought.
That's exactly right. And what we spoke about that in the winter, Mr. Freyer, and we did purchase vests since then to bring
them up to date, but as they expire, this will put us in good shape for the next year, year and a half to make sure everything is in date. So this is in the spirit of that discussion, we're keeping up with the replacement plan.
You remember our discussion.
I remember our discussion very well.
Okay, that's great news. I'm glad that you are. Thank you.
Any further comments or discussion? Mr. Dakowitz?
Yes, sir. Next is Planning and Zoning, the Conservation Commission. Steve Kleppen?
Sure. There you go. Yeah, we had, as you know, sometimes we're working on planning studies and such, and they don't follow the fiscal calendar very well. They tend to run always a little longer than I hope and anticipate. So we have a vendor, a consulting firm out of Boston that's working on a study for us. And they are kind of at the beginning stages of the second phase of the study. And we'd like to continue that work. So we had just moved some funds around internally to cover that cost. And we hope that study will be done. We're hoping by April at the latest of this year, but it just ran past the fiscal year and really wasn't much we could do about it at that point.
Any questions or comments? Thank you. Mr. Dakowitz.
Thank you. Next, we have Transportation, Mobility, and Parking. They tended to spend money with fiscal year 22 funding, but it really was a purchase from last year, just like Le Mans, and they want to get a replenishment. The total is $142,734. Is someone here from TMP to speak to
Ms.
that?
Vanashek is here. I believe Ms. Vanashek is here. Am I correct?
She had to jump off. She said she had a District B meeting she had to go to, so she had to jump
okay.
off. And Jim is on vacation, unfortunately.
Okay.
And I can't make anything up credible to sound good for that.
Are there any questions? I don't know if anybody has any questions about the items.
But Henry, from what I'm reading here, this looks like basically the same situation that we have with some of the other ones where the 22 funding was used, but the purchase was really applicable to the prior fiscal year.
Exactly. It was just simply a delay in our accounting with modified accrual accounting for government purposes. We keep the books open through August 31st. But if work was done and the invoice came in August and we didn't pay it in September, they probably drew down the current year funding. And then they look back and say, wait a second, that should really be last year. As long as they had a surplus, I'm inclined, and the mayor's inclined to give them that rollover. So the biggest one was $63,579. And they have different vendors: Traffic Logic, Government Connection, Connecticut Business Systems, electrical repairs for the TMP upgrades, construction painting costs for upgrades, conference room. So it totals $142,000, and they have plenty of surplus to cover that.
Okay.
Mr. Dakowitz, I might be missing something, but I might have an old copy of this list. I don't see anything that adds up to 142,000.
It could be that subtotal is wrong. I'm sorry, I apologize. But we will check the numbers and we will only roll over what is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I have the 62,000. And then the next items are quite a bit smaller: 3,006, 867, 2,003,
Right.
3,004.
Yeah. We will check that. As I say, it may total 142, but they were all of the same kind of expenses. If they total less, we will only roll over the amounts that add up to.
This
It
is
simply looks
May.
like the Planning and Zoning
I'm
Conservation
sorry.
Commission line item is in there as well.
Correct. Mr. Abrams is correct that it includes the planning and zoning conservation.
Okay.
So that's the total for the economic and community development
Gotcha.
sector, which includes planning and zoning as well as TMP. So when you add those two together, we get to 142.
Gotcha.
142 minus the 68 is about 75,000 for TMP.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay, Mr. Dakowitz.
Next is Department of Public Works. We have the head of Public Works, Anthony Carr, here. There are several different operations. I'll let him walk you through it. Thank you.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor, members of the BET, and Henry. So just to give a bigger picture and sum to what Henry said earlier, we have 3 different divisions that are requesting rollovers: operations, engineering, and recreation and parks. And basically, there's 2 components of why the surpluses are being requested. They are COVID related. The majority of them are COVID related. And the issues that we encountered were twofold. The first was the material availability. A lot of lumber, steel, concrete, plastic pipe, especially other materials that we use in our typical right-of-way construction or in public works construction was either not available, or we anticipate or are aware of price increases for this upcoming fiscal year. The other side of that was more the labor. And when you've seen the comments column, you know, the project was delayed due to COVID or staffing. There's the in-house staff, which had to work on alternate work schedules, including engineering, operations, all the divisions, including WPC and building management, which are not on here. So there was the staffing in-house, but there was also the outside staffing, the consultants who were doing the same thing for us as well too. They had to balance their staffing. Once March of 2020 hit, they took a reroute and they remapped the way they do business, whether it was virtual, electronic, et cetera. So there was a little bit of learning from each of the sides, both from the public works staff and from the consultants. So that's really in between the operations, and we can go through each item if you like, or we can go through each division. But in operations globally, which is headed by Chris Torrey, Superintendent of Operations, who's also on this call, that
unless any of the BET members wants to go through some of the smaller items, I would kind of focus on the bigger items because most of them are in the area of 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, and it's all pretty much COVID related. So if there's any questions about any of the bigger items that the BET members would like to address, or Mr. Carr, if you feel any of the other ones, or Ms. Valadares, or Mr. Hughes, if you feel like there's any other areas that need to be explained.
Mr. Mayor, if the team could speak for 1 minute on the $124,000 for on-call engineering services, just to give that more context, please.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Or Ms. Valadares, who's going to handle that?
I could start it off, Mr. Mayor, and Vanessa is more than capable to finish it. So the on-call engineering services are, we being engineering, has 4 contracts that we utilize with that account. One is on-call surveying for basically outside consultant support to perform surveying work for our design projects and construction projects. And that contract is with Eamon Kirby. We also have an on-call engineering contract with Weston and Sampson, another on-call engineering contract with AI Engineers, Inc., and a third contract with Ty and Bond. And what that on-call engineering services does is that provides support to our staff for the high volume of projects that we're trying to either backlog due to COVID or new projects, especially those that resulted from a lot of the flooding from Tropical Storm Elsa, from Tropical Storm Ida. We're doing additional investigations to all the flooding. Some of the projects are already on its way. Others will be pulled off the shelf and revisited. But it's important to know that money, that funding has not been expended. That is simply the sum of all of the contracts that I just mentioned, the 4 contracts, the 1 surveying and the 3 engineering contracts. Those are encumbered funds through purchase orders for on-call services that we have not expended yet as of last year due to the COVID impacts. So the money has not been expended, but it's been encumbered.
Understood. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mr. Abrams.
Ms. Valadares, do you have anything else to add?
I think that Anthony covered everything, but we actually encumbered the money. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the invoices on time to process before the July 31st. So that was exactly one of the examples that Henry just used, that sometimes by the time we get the invoice, We are already late in the year. Also, we use that money because last year we were short on 7 people on staff, so we ended up using the professional service to cover that.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Does any other BET members have any questions in the area of operations, engineering, or recreation and parks that you'd like to have a little bit more explanation on?
No, I don't
Okay,
think so.
Mr. Dekowitz.
Okay, I'll go to the next item, which I think of as a rollover, but technically it's not a rollover. We've gotten $3.5 million from Sono GGP, and that was a payment in lieu of services they were supposed to provide. And we have identified 1.3 million for the YMCA for the building downtown. So the $1 million was identified, but just like everyone else has been saying with COVID, it was not spent last year. So that money will be spent this year and will come out of a separate account. Fitz-May has set up a separate fund for these amounts. So it really doesn't affect our budget from last year. Whatever grants we got last year are recognized as revenue last year. This is a grant that was separately accounted for. It was received earlier. And when we were talking about rollovers, items that weren't spent in 21 and will be spent in fiscal year 22, it was added to the list, but it really is not a rollover. So you've heard of all the rollover of expenditure amounts. We just bring this to your attention, but I just think of it as a rollover, but it's revenue that's been isolated. It's a little bit different, but it will be used in this year rather than this past year.
And just for the edification of the BOE, our Board of Estimate and Taxation, Mr. Dakowitz and I and my chief of staff, we sat down and went over every single line prior to this meeting to make sure that we're all comfortable with the requests and why the requests were being made. And I subscribe to the same theory as Mr. Dakowitz, that when we have people that are responsible in their budgeting and have surpluses left over, we do want to take into consideration that fact and perhaps help them move forward in the next fiscal year. We know that budgeting is not an exact science, but our department heads are doing an exceptional job at coming in under budget for the items and being very responsible in their budgeting administration. So unless there are any further questions, we can vote on that item. Okay, all in favor of the fiscal year 2021 balance surplus rollover request, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Next item on the agenda is the Board of Education under Connecticut General Statutes 10-248A. They're requesting a maximum surplus deposit into a non-lapsing account. Can I have somebody move that for discussion?
So moved.
Mr. Freyer moves. We have Mr. Hamilton here from the Board of Education for Norwalk Public Schools. Mr. Hamilton.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, and good to be with you, members of the board. This request is one that you have seen in prior years as well. We provided you with a memo along with an accounting of where the Board of Education ended last year, including the items for which there were purchase orders outstanding on June 30th. And then the final operating results for the Board of Education after taking into account all of the purchase orders and other obligations at the end of the year, which included a couple of unsettled labor contracts and deferred retirement payouts for a few employees who elected to defer their retirement payouts to January as permitted by their labor contract. Where that left the Board of Education was with a final free balance of $326,909. And as we've indicated in our in the memo to you, obviously we're still confronting the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that we have additional costs in a variety of areas that are facing the school district, more frequent replacement of air filters throughout all of our buildings, replacement of other air handling equipment, hand washing stations, additional hand washing stations in schools for students, development of some outdoor learning spaces, and I think most importantly, really catching students up from the impact of a very difficult year last year. We recently received some updated information from the state relative to what the state calls the Smarter Balance achievement reports. And these numbers are, which were shared with our board at their meeting a couple of weeks ago, are certainly present us with some major challenges going forward. We know, for instance, ELA pre-pandemic 2019 ELA scores, we had for grade 3, we had 45.8% of students meeting proficiency. And for 2021, we were at 35.9%. And in math, the delta has become even greater. Grade 3 math scores went from in 2019 to 46.8 to 38 or 34.7% in terms of percentage of students meeting proficiency. So both in ELA, excuse me, both in ELA and in math, we know that we need to catch our students up. That's going to mean additional tutoring, additional time, additional support to help catch our students up. So with that sort of as the backdrop, we are requesting, our board did vote at their last board meeting to request that you place the unencumbered reserve of $326,000 into the non-lapsing fund that was created by the city. And so that is our request.
It's just probably a good time to really praise our teachers and the NPS staff for going through a very, very difficult time. And we, for sure, don't know the total costs that we're going to be confronting. As Mr. Hamilton mentioned, there'll be air filtration systems and other kinds of things, air conditioning and other kinds of things that we need to do to make sure that our schools are safe. So I would certainly again, we went over some of these things and it will be more than supportive of this. And the request is something that we get on an annual basis. This request is rather nominal, and I think that it's a fair request to help them move forward. And if there's any further discussion or comment.
I had just a quick question, Tom. Is these remaining budget, unspent budget, have you met with Henry and gone over those and explained some of the big items that just to get us comfortable with the surpluses that are showing up and that the fact that they are going to be used? I know, the mayor has mentioned that he and Henry and his chief of staff got together and went over all the ones on the city side. Have you had an opportunity to review these with Henry at all?
I have not had an opportunity, but I'm certainly willing and happy to do that with Henry anytime that he's available. I would say that in terms of where the Board of Ed ended the year, it is, even though obviously our budget is fairly large, in terms of a percentage turnback, historically the Board of Education turnback number has actually been less as a percentage of the total budget than the city. So, and I haven't looked at the city numbers for last year, but did look at them in the previous 5 years, and each of the previous 5 years, the turn back from the Board of Education was actually smaller as a percentage, even though the total dollars were larger, because obviously by compared to any city department, but it's really because of the size of the Board of Education budget. For instance, looking at our largest account, which is the 117 account, which is the teacher wages, that's an $82 million budget. The original budget was actually 81,984,000. We transferred some money in, or our board transferred some money in during the year, bringing the adjusted budget to 82.7 million, and we actually spent 82,144,000. So we were really right on the money in terms of, even though it's showing, oh, there was some turnback in that account, but given the size of the account, it's actually a bit like landing an airplane on an aircraft carrier, frankly, because there's a lot of different factors that come into play here. You've got, some number of vacancies that may or may not occur during the year. You have turnover from the, end of when we're putting the budget together. We don't know who's going to retire. And so we have to make assumptions about how many people will retire and what salary the retiring employees will go out versus what salary the incoming employees will come in at. And then, of course, you also have turnover during the course of the school year, not as much, obviously, but there is some turnover that occurs during the course of the school year. So it is certainly not an exact science. There are assumptions that have to go into any budget that you put together. But certainly I'm more than happy to meet with Henry to go over all of the numbers in as much detail as he wants to go over them in.
Henry, how do you feel about that?
I would say Evergreen is coming in and they get to look at the whole picture and all the pieces and all the moving parts. And I would defer to them. They have full-time capability and experts coming in. I would agree with Tom. I'm now going to call him my financial top gun that lands the plane on the aircraft carrier. And I will commend him. I think as a percentage, it really is very small, and I'm aware of all the vagaries. So I think at this time, the time is better spent with the consultants looking at the big picture, and let's see where we go from there.
Okay, fair enough.
Any other questions or comments? I also want to talk about the new level of cooperation and between the Board of Education and the City of Norwalk relative to their budget process, meeting with the Common Council Finance Committee together with the Board of Education Finance Committee, having these ongoing dialogues to make sure that we get it right. As you know, as I mentioned, budgeting is not an exact science. You do the best you possibly can. There's going to be some deficits. There's going to be some surpluses, a lot of unexpected things that happen during the fiscal year. So all in all, I think the Board of Education did a really good job of staying within budget and again, having to spend probably more than they anticipated due to COVID, just like the city did. So any further comment or discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I also want to say that while we're talking about the people that were working during COVID, police and fire, they were out there every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, working hard. And, I want to give them a shout out as well. I know we have the additional items, item number 5. I know Mr. Androsco from Oak Hills is on the call. I think maybe during last month, somebody wished to have him here or somebody here to have any discussion.
It said something in the minutes, I believe. The only comment I had was on page 28 and 29. You can't read any of the numbers that we got.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure what happened, but something must have happened when the PDF was converted. That it wasn't what we sent. So I think it's just a technical glitch.
Clearly, that's not what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, so I think over the past couple of months, there's been some other technical glitches with invites and things like that. There were some questions that came up, I think, in the August 2nd meeting, and then an invite got dropped. So I never actually didn't know that the September meeting was happening. So here now, and based on the level of interest in those questions that remains, we can tackle them. I had kind of 5 things. One of them was those questions to go over. So I can give a quick report. I can probably cover all of that in 5-6 minutes, if you like.
That'd be great.
Okay, so the August financials, which you can't read, basically paint a fairly good story versus budget versus prior non-COVID years. So leaving 21 out, which was COVID affected and extremely good, kind of an outlier across the city, I think. But even versus the prior years where, the finances were struggling a little bit. We came in revenue on budget at about 300K, expenses a little bit lower than budget at about 170. So our net operating income was about 130, which is 25 better than budget. So, only 2 years of our fiscal year so far, but trending well. September has started to show just the slightest amount of weakness, I think. Our rounds are a little bit below budget. Budgeted about 4,700 rounds, coming in maybe about 4,500 rounds. And this is something we'll track very closely to determine whether this is going to paint weakness for the coming months. There can't be too much weakness because our rounds budget really dives October, November. And so you can't have much lower than the very low amounts that we expect over the weekend, winter. But then, we'll be tracking closely to see how strongly we expect to bounce back March, April, when the season starts up again at the end of the fiscal year. But that's a bit of an unknown as so far. But so far, tracking well the budget. Third point I wanted to make beyond August and September is our financial audit. We began that really in July, and we're wrapping it up. It's with our audit firm, and it's in partner review. And once it's done, the reason the BET should be interested in it is that once it's done and accepted by us, it will trigger a 1% payment as per our restructured loan agreement, which will be about $20,000 that will add to our payment for that relevant month. In addition to, whatever rounds generated payments we give to or we pay back to the city. So, that's progressing. It's a little bit faster than last year, but I think, we're really hoping it can be wrapped up by mid-October. Fourth thing were the questions from prior meetings, the first of which was kind of how season pass revenue factors into the monthly payments that we give to the city. And that actually they're treated as non-revenue rounds, and I think that's what was triggering the question. And we pay current fiscal year, we pay $2.05 per revenue round. However, they are not classified as revenue rounds. The revenue that we receive from season passes gets covered in that 1% annual payment. And so 1% of all of that revenue related to golf gets distributed to the city. The second, so I'll pause there if there's any further questions on that one.
But that's not the agreement. The agreement was $2 per round.
No, the agreement was $2 per revenue round. These are not accounted for as revenue rounds because there's no specific transaction that triggers that money coming to us, right? That's a one-time payment at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And I agree that that's what you're saying. But I was always under the impression that it was going to be for total rounds, not just revenue rounds. And then that 1% that you're talking about, that would be over the total revenue. So we're losing that $2 per round.
That would
Because
mean
that
if we sold
Right.
everything as season passes and no one had rounds, you wouldn't pay us anything.
Yeah,
Which I think would be not appropriate. I think we would revisit the wording and the definition that we use for season pass or for revenue rounds under those conditions.
I think, Joe, that's the issue, right? The agreement was set prior to the establishment of the season pass
Right.
environment, right? And so what we as a board are asking you is, given that you have installed that as a means of driving revenue, we need to relook at how the city receives repayment on those rounds that are not classified as revenue generating rounds, but in fact are generating significant revenue for the course and represent, my guess, a fair number of the total rounds played by those individuals who have season passes. Right?
And,
Well, they
So that's the concern I think we as a board have is, since creating that as an option, you've created a greater number of non-revenue generating rounds, which understates the potential repayment to the city.
All true. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say your non-revenue rounds. I mean, it's hard to tell what is a non-revenue round on the numbers that you sent, and I was just looking at what I can discern on the budget was that you had 23,000 revenue rounds. I don't know whether this is by the month or the rest of the year, whatever it is, and then 4,000 for non-revenue rounds. So we're talking about the difference is about $8,000 as opposed to $46,000. It would be an additional $8,000. But the thing I'm concerned about is I think you're getting confused a little bit by saying, well, we're also giving you the 1%, but the 1% we're going to get on the total revenue anyway. Okay.
Sure.
That's over and above this round analysis. So I don't think how do we define that non-revenue rounds? Is that all just the season pass people, or is there something else in there?
No, there's really two
That's a lot of
sources.
revenue. I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's really two sources. I'd say the larger is the season passes at this point, and then the other is any barter rounds that we do, because there are sub-services that we can kind of, instead of paying out of OpEx, we can barter for.
What kind of, that concerns me a little bit if you're getting into bartering. Because then we're not recognizing revenue if you're bartering.
True,
But
we're
we're
receiving
limiting
a service
expense
for it.
there too. So I'm not as concerned.
Yeah,
on
but
that.
but you just can't bartering is not a way to run a business, because as Ed says, you got expense there, but how do we know that the expense and the revenue that you're trading, so to speak, is equal? It's a judgment. It's arbitrary.
It is not arbitrary. No, it's a judgment made by experts.
Yeah. So Joe, I'd like to come back to the first point though, and I don't know that we can resolve it here, but how do we get to a point with the authority, yourself, us as a board, and the city, where we look at the season pass related revenue and come to some agreement on repayment on those of the city loan out of that revenue that you generate? I don't think we're going to solve it here at 10 of 8.
And one thing that was mentioned, I think, by Mr. Abrams was that the agreement was formulated before the revenue rounds. The season pass program. So maybe we can sit down and take a look at that. Now, the question I have, and I'm not sure I know the answer, Mr. Gelleret may know, when you have a season pass, do you play unlimited numbers of rounds of golf with that way and pay no money?
That is correct.
Yes, you pay an upfront fee, and you pay unlimited rounds. And of course, it drives you to play more rounds, of course, because you want to get your money's worth. And the more you play, the cheaper the per rounds will go. So I think what we need, I agree with what Ed and Jim are saying. we need to find how you came up with, or are you gonna, okay, are you guys anticipating to having seasonal passes next year?
I believe so. Yeah, we haven't seen our pricing proposals yet, but yeah, I believe we intend to keep them going.
Then I think it would be helpful if you showed us how you came up with your analysis for your projections for next year and usage. Because theoretically, everyone that has a pass, if there's 75 people with passes, they could play 1,000, I mean, the max every day if they wanted to. So I don't know how you figure that in. And it's usage to the course too, by the way. The more we play, the more usage it is on the course, which is a cost to you guys also. So that's something you really have to take a look at. I know this happened after the fact of the renegotiation, but I think it would be helpful if you showed or shared with us how you do your projections for next year, since obviously we can't do anything about it this year. The other question I just have is, by the way, the course is in great shape, by the way. Jim has done a great job. And the other thing I say is, of course, and I mentioned it every month, is that I'm very disappointed about the restaurant still not being opened. And as a partner, Joe, to you guys, how would you characterize the partnership with the vendor this year?
I think the partnership with the vendor has been productive, although not an open restaurant to show for it. We've talked about the delays that have occurred. This was the last point I wanted to hit, but I can hit it now. There's been construction delays. There's been a lot of that. And there's been new things that we found during the kind of final push towards getting permits. The latest of which, kind of mid-month last month, was identified that the fire alarm system was not working. And this is not the sort of thing that we're going to compromise on, right? So this is taking time to procure estimates and actually get a vendor in to fix. And the second
Joe, I'm
thing
just curious on that point. You said the fire alarm is not working, fire system is not working. Are you having events in that? Are you having private parties in that event currently with that going on?
No, we're not having indoor private events. No, it's been a
haven't had
construction site. Not as far as I know. No, it's been a construction site.
You might want to check. You might want to check that, okay, before you answer that, because I play there and I've seen private parties there. The other thing is what is the capital? I know you guys are doing trying to do the paths, which is great, the continuing paths. I see that in your budget. I don't see the breakout. How much are you expensing for that? How much do you think it's going to cost?
If you don't mind, I'm going to go back and talk about the other delay on the restaurant
before
we jump to that other topic. Yeah. So the second thing working into the restaurant delay is a text amendment that we're seeking in zoning language, which is I believe it's on the agenda for the October 7th zoning commission. It has to go through a bunch of items, and then hopefully we will get through that by I think the next meeting, which would be November 5th. And then the idea would be to open relatively soon after that. Hopefully permits would come after the fire alarm system work is done. And we would be able to open shortly after that. Now, that's not peak golf season, but it would be time to open the restaurant in time for the holiday season, work out any operational things that need to be done. And then, be ready, up and running for the beginning of the next season in 22.
Joe, and you want to stay on that point. You said it was been a productive relationship. Don't we get 10% of the revenue that is generated, and there's no revenue generated from the restaurant? How is that productive? What am I missing?
Yeah, so we've had the halfway house, and we've had other operations, or some of which you know about, that have been producing revenue for OHPA. Not to the tune of a full operating restaurant, but it has been. And when I say productive, I mean, there has been meaningful progress towards opening a transformed restaurant.
I did have a conversation
that the city paid for the renovations, correct? Or the authority, I'm sorry, the authority paid for it.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with the building inspector today, and last he was informed from planning and zoning, they're ready to issue a permit, and they need zoning and health sign off. So
yes,
it appears that it's just a matter of a couple of weeks before they can get the sign off and get their CO.
Thank you for that
That's
update,
all.
Mayor. But I mean, if you go back on the memos on the authority website, they were projected June 1st, June 15th, August 1st. I mean, just saying it's.
And we were wrong about that, and we can't be shy about that. We had unforeseen difficulties in opening, and we hope to be open as soon as we can.
Good.
And
The
in
capital.
terms of-
On the
in
pass,
ter-
I'm sorry, how much were you thinking about for the pass, the capital expense?
I'm sorry, I don't follow.
You have on your thing that the capital expenditures, and it's included with other things, a cart pass, continuous cart pass. So just curious what that is going to cost, because I know they're preparing for do it now.
It's true, and this is one of the things that I'm not exactly sure how to proceed on, because we have a contract that we've signed, which is in the sum total of about 130. And unfortunately, due to some of these massively heavy rains, we've had erosion on a fairly steep hill on this by the 6th green,
Yes.
which has kind of taken out part of the cart path, which was not part of the plan. So, we are planning to begin this project mid-October, and we're hoping that we can roll that in and save on mobilization costs that would be incurred if we had to do a completely separate project. So we'd never want this to happen, but the timing of it is kind of good because we already have a paving project in the wings that we can kind of bolt onto. So hopefully we can do it with little additional cost, but there is going to be some additional cost there above and beyond the contract cost.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
I would recommend that perhaps we sit down and take a look at the agreement and see where we might want to update it based on circumstances, and see if we can't come to an agreement with Oak Hills Park Authority, and especially in the area of the permits, because then we get, I think he said 1% of the permit fee, but that's certainly probably a lot less than we would get if they were just revenue rounds without the season pass.
I
That
would
is true.
agree.
So
Mr. Mayor. I think that's worthy of discussion.
the 1%, yeah, I don't want to obfuscate or leave anybody in doubt. The 1% stretches across both revenue rounds and non-revenue rounds, as well as cart revenue and several other things that really aren't particularly greens fees rounds related. The point that I'd make, which Mr. Jelleret partially made, is when you average down the revenue that we get per non-revenue round and leave barter off, right? When you average down the average greens fee per season pass round, it's significantly lower than the average fee that you get for a revenue round. And so, I think the way we've been thinking about it is, one, from an accounting perspective, because there is no specific transaction that occurs, there's nothing to trigger that per transaction item. And two, averaging that down, the $2.05 that we pay would be a much larger percentage of whatever dollar amount is paid on average than a typical revenue round, which is unknowable at the time you're paying it because you don't know how many rounds that individual person is going to play. So as we've done deliberate thinking through all of this, and as we've thought it through, the only conclusion that we've drawn is we put these in non-revenue rounds because there is no technical revenue triggered at the time of play. But yes, of course, we can revisit that and discuss.
And again, I think we want to be fair on all sides, but I think it's just worthy of laying all the facts out and having a discussion.
Yeah, I think it's just got to be very clear. I mean, because right now we're having a discussion about what does it really mean? And we all have different perceptions of what it means. So I think we have to lay the cards on the table and say, this is what we really mean by this.
Sure.
But I am still very concerned about the barter thing. I'd be very leery about having any barter arrangements. And
barter,
if maybe the next time we meet or we have that conversation about how this, how we want the $2.05 to go, maybe you could explain to us what is involved in this barter deal,
Sure.
these barter arrangements.
I don't know if I'll be able to pull up the numbers in time. And I
Well, or
won't.
just in theory, just explain to us what it is. I mean, what are we bartering? Okay. Is it goods and services or is it just services? What? I don't know.
I'd say it's really services. It's on the services side, and I don't want to overblow how big this is. It's
Okay.
not by any sense of the, but in any stretch of the imagination, the majority of those non-revenue rounds.
Okay.
It's the minority, vast minority.
Yeah.
Joe, do you book revenue and expense when you have a barter transaction? Do you show the expenditure for the services, the value, and the value of the revenue?
I would have to look into that. I don't know the specific accounting.
I think you should point that out to your auditors and let them opine, because I think it should be grossed up on both sides. Because otherwise, you're just having economic transactions that you're not booking.
Mhm.
And you're saying they're equal, but no one's really getting a valuation. And so you should check with the auditors to make sure it's being handled properly.
Yeah, they probably don't know.
This has been a common, yes, absolutely, Mr. Jackowitz, but this has been a common practice for years and they've never flagged it up as a problem. But I will look into the specific accounting that's done for this and I'll report back.
I would imagine also that those kinds of rounds and the permit rounds or the season pass rounds are probably codified to show that this is what it is. So you can identify.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
You could also lower the cost of the permit that you're that entire permit that you're selling, and then charge $2 every time they come through and play.
It's not up to us to decide how they would operate their organization. I'm
not telling you how to do it. I'm just
I think
saying
I heard
that's
Troy
the
choke.
way
I'm
you
not
could
sure.
do it.
Well, it defeats the benefit to the player of what they've set up.
Not really. I mean, you're still getting a reduced greens fee, a dramatically reduced greens fee, and you'll forget after a while that you have to go pay $2 every time you play. You got to check in anyway, right? And
Yes, you do.
Yes,
carts
but
are not
as far-
included in that, right?
It's extremely frictional.
No, they're not.
At the moment.
So carts are not included. So do you take a cart? I know, Troy, you take a cart.
Yeah, I
So
do.
you go in there and take a cart. So you're going to pay $2. You're going to pay $18, or you're going to pay $20. What's the big deal? $20.05.
Yeah, but you got to look at the initial. Everyone looks at how many rounds and what the cost can come down. It's for them to come up with. I mean, I don't want to tell them how to do their. But I know what you're saying, Jim. But I think it's up to them to come up with that.
Oh,
And let me
yeah,
just.
I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying that there's a suggestion that you know how many rounds are played. You know who's playing. You know that the permit guys and the non-permit guys, and even the barter guys.
You're right.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Andrasco or any further comments?
No, but
I just want
thank
to
you,
say,
Joe,
Joe,
for your patience.
thank you for attending and thank you for your
Yeah.
presentation. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
I don't think you're really happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here now.
We're all happy to be here.
Yeah, it's the end. We're letting you go now.
Yeah.
Okay, any other information items that anybody wants to look at on the agenda? Okay.
I'd like to move that we adjourn.
That sounds like a plan. Mr. Freyer has moved for adjournment. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.